Hi. So this week's lesson focuses on political debates from the 17th century. Now, these may seem very arcane to you, but they are the basis for the kind of political world, the society in which we live today. In thinking about how to introduce this for you, I want to borrow from Ezra Klein, a political commentator of our time, who actually makes some points that I'll try to connect to the political commentary of the Restoration in the 17th century.
That we live in a decadent age. And decadence here is this pathology that comes from a mixture of affluence, so things are pretty good for a lot of people, and lack of purpose, a lack of grand ideological goals and ambitions. And when you put those together in a society, you stagnate. You're not driving in any particular direction, and there's a lot of force behind the status quo that shuts down anybody who wants to really change things. I've been thinking about this politically quite a bit. We are still running here in this country on the fumes of political ideas from the 18th century. We're trying to perfect them, to live up to them in a way they never did, sure. But for all that we've learned, all that we've seen, the form of government that we practice and even that we aspire to hasn't really changed since the dawn of this country. Is that a function actually of it working so well at this point? Or is that a function of our inability now to imagine alternatives, to believe, as those who came before us believed, as we honor them for believing, that the future really can be radically different than the present? One thing
Now, we're going to read those radical ideas. When the future was thought to be possibly very different, not only by people, we're going to read people not only who were advocating for radical change, but also those who were staunchly advocating for the status quo. We, in Israel, Klein is, of course, talking about the United States and those ideas that formed the United States, the Enlightenment ideas that came from the 18th century and indeed the 17th century before that. We're going to read those ideas. We live in a country in Israel where the status quo has a kind of sacred status, a sacred aura. I live in a city, Jerusalem, where status quo is kind of the litmus test. All sides agree not to change status quo. But necessity is the mother of invention, and we may be entering, the corona experience was sort of the entree to this new age. We might very well be entering into an era of disruption and scarcity when radical ideas, rather than the status quo, become more possible. What might those ideas look like in the future? Anyone's guess. But having a firm foundation in what the ideas were that formed the world we live in, when all those questions were still open about whether monarchy or kind of republican democracy, those ideas are what we will read this week. Our texts, again Milton, sadly for the last time, Robert Filmer, a staunch monarchist, Thomas Hobbes, and John Locke, the two canonical thinkers from the 17th century whose ideas set the stage for what political and modern society indeed looks like. Let's get started.